Thank you, Scott.
All right, so first of all, I'd like to dedicate the shiur here by David Jure in honor of Refuah Shlema to Rabbi Hyatt, who we were talking about, and in honor of Rabbi Grauman and all of those who attend the shiur.
Oh.
Okay, go ahead, Jay.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I took a look at the large amount of mazel tovs. We have a complete mixture, so we don't have any grandsons or boys, but we have 2 girls today, and graduations and bar mitzvahs and everything. So let me start. Leah and Michael Bandler on the bar mitzvah, the bat mitzvah of their granddaughter, Mazel Tov.
Mazel Tov.
Teresa Vernon on the engagement of her grandson, Mazel Tov.
Mazel Tov.
Tov.
Lori and Stuart Cohn on the birth of a granddaughter.
Mazel Tov.
Vivian and Arnie Kirschenbaum on the engagement of their grandson.
Mazel Tov.
Mazel Tov.
Sarah Silva on the bat mitzvah of her granddaughter.
Mazel
Mazel
Tov.
Tov.
Mindy and Shmuel Talchinsky on the bar mitzvah of their grandson.
Mazel Tov.
Mazel Tov.
Mindy and Shmuel Talchinsky on the birth of a granddaughter.
Mazel Tov.
Excuse me, any other mazel tovs to announce? Okay. Category 2, Refuah Shlema. Please raise your hand. And Rabbi Grauman will repeat the names.
Rabbi David Meir ben Chayasipa,
David Meir ben Chayasipa,
Yitzchak Zev ben Devora,
Yitzchak Zev ben Devora,
Yaakov Tzvi ben Liba,
Yaakov Tzvi ben Liba,
Chaim Aiden Shalom ben Alta Brina.
Chaim Aiden Shalom ben Alta Brina.
I have Rafai Binyamin Yerafael ben Rayut.
Ben Rayut.
Rabbi Binyamin Rafael ben Rayut. Yeah.
Rabbi Binyamin ben Rayut. Yeah. Jay.
Rivka Malka ben Matil.
Rivka Malka ben Matil.
Rabbi Sacha Dov ben Chaya Bracha.
Rabbi Sacha Dov ben Chaya Bracha.
Rav Naftali Halevi ben Chana.
Rav Naftali Halevi ben Chana.
And Harav Yaakov Tzvi ben Liba.
Rav Yaakov Tzvi ben Liba.
Udal bat Rachel.
Udal bat Rachel.
Thank you.
Harav Rafol Yisrael Yaakov ben Bela. Chana bas Devora. Tanel Elon ben Chayish Prince.
Anything else?
Okay, we're
I
covered.
want to say good afternoon to Stuart in Eretz Yisrael.
Thank you.
He's almost ready to have dinner.
Just about, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Your sites, Yale, do you want to say a couple of words about your dad, please?
Sure. So my dad's second yortzeit is coming up this coming week. It's going to be Wednesday. As you know, he was a regular attendee of Rabbi Hyatt shiur, and then I think it's for a part of Rabbi Grauman shiur. He sometimes slept through Rabbi Hyatt shiur, but a lot of us did. But he really enjoyed it. It was just a nice between, early minyan, nice kiddush, and then shiur afterwards. Really kind of made Shabbos a special time, and it was nice to be able to spend that time with him. So I really enjoyed it. His name is Gershon Yosef ben Yisroel Moshe.
Gershon Yosef ben Yisroel Moshe. And Shemesh and Lavan Aliyah. We should all have in mind.
I also want to mention that he had these very legal questions of the Gemara. And he would sometimes have an introduction to his question.
Yes.
Professional. We loved it. Every one of us just loved it.
We miss.
Everybody.
I think I mentioned to you, Yale, that Gil, your dad was my law professor in one course I took. I was at Georgetown. I took one course at GW, and he was my law professor, and I got to spend a beautiful Shabbos at your home when you were very little, because GW did not allow, all the exams were on Shabbos, and they didn't allow you to not be sort of guarded or proctored. So I had to spend Shabbos at your home, and once the Shabbos I took the exam, your father administered the exam. It was we were living downtown. It was our first Shabbos in Camp Mill. It was an extraordinary Shabbos. So I think you weren't aware perhaps, but I thank you.
And I'll just mention Jeff Schneider, Judd Lifshitz, and several other people. Arlene Groner, who's being honored by the Bikur Cholim, they all spent Shabbos at our house. I do remember some of them. Same reason, because GW would not allow you to. They would not have a makeup exam when the exam was on Shabbos, and so
Right.
they would have to spend Shabbos with us. So my
Right.
father could sign off on an affidavit saying that nobody visited and nobody
Right.
called you on Shabbos. So yeah,
Exactly.
it was interesting.
Exactly.
A very different time. Very
Yeah.
different time.
Very different. Yeah, wonderful time.
Oh, so we also enjoyed him once in a while on Sunday to have breakfast at Goldberg's. He would go with us.
Yeah.
He loved to eat.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
very true.
Wonderful memories.
Thank you all.
Wonderful memories.
He
Thank
would
you all.
always get the soup as well as.
Any
Okay.
other yard sites to announce?
Go ahead. What, Jay?
Any other yard sites to announce today?
Yes.
Yeah. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Akiva ben Harav Mordechai. That's my
Akiva
father.
ben Rav Mordechai.
Shiur.
That was your father, Louis?
My father-in-law,
Your father-in-law.
Akiva ben Harav Mordechai.
Akiva ben Rav Mordechai, Neshama Shem Havnaliyah.
We can still
The
hear
unforgettable Chazan.
we can still hear his voice. When you stop and think, you'll get pieces. At least with me, I can hear his voice coming back. Beautiful, beautiful voice and nusach, a real professional. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other yard sites to announce?
Neshama Shem Havnaliyah.
Okay, Rabbi Grauman.
Okay. So we left off last week at Yud Beis Amid Beis at the top. We were finishing up and discussing the question of whether a katan, the minor child of a sharecropper or a poel who was collecting leket, whether that child could collect leket, because the halacha is that a sharecropper who owns a part of the land, sharecroppers have a percentage of the land, cannot collect leket on their own behalf. That's forbidden by the Torah. However, a minor child, even if it's going to the father, may collect. So the Gemara comes back and then back and forth. At the end, it says, the Gemara agrees that it says, I think Rav Papa, so Rav Ada Bar Masna asked the question, sort of euphemistically, can you put a lion in a field to scare off the aniyim if the minor child is going to be behind his father? Basically, everybody's going to give up and say, okay, no point in our collecting anymore. He's got all of it. So the Gemara answers that really it's kind of an unwritten code among the aniyim that they would let him do it, because in the circumstance where they, meaning that another ani would also be a sharecropper and have his child, he'd also want his child to collect after him. So it was kind of like a wink and a nod among all of the aniyim that they're not particular, they're not makbid if the minor son collects behind the father, because they may be in that circumstance in the future. So that's where we left off. Now, 3 lines from the top on Yud Beis Amid Beis. So we left off almost at the end of that sugya, but not quite, because the Gemara says with Peliga Rabbi Hyatt that this view that a minor son, meaning a katan, can collect after the father is not universally held. And we'll understand the nuance. Rabbi Hyatt, because Rabbi Hyatt says, Rabbi Yochanan, he says the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Lo gadol mamish, lo katan mamish. When the Gemara says a gadol or a katan who is the child of a sharecropper, he doesn't mean a gadol meaning 13 years and a day, or a katan meaning a not yet a bar mitzvah child. Ella, the definition is gadol v'samach al shulchan aviv, zeh katan, Cotton vein is somach al shulchan aviv ze gadol. So he makes a distinction not on chronological age, but on the age of support. So let's take a look at Rashi. Okay, at Rabbi Hyatt, it's the last of the fourth line from the top. Rashi, the Omer af gadol sheyesh lo zechia. He has chusin in samachval shulchan aviv. Let's say there's a gadol who cannot fend for himself, and he sits at his father's table so that his father is supporting him, right? Samachval shulchan aviv mitziyasa la'aviv. Then even though he's 15, 16, 17 years old, it belongs to the father mishum iba, because of conflict, meaning that there shouldn't be conflict in the family since the father is sustaining that child, that child is already a gadol. It's only fair, says the Gemara, that that child go ahead and reciprocate, and if they find something, they should give it back to the father. And further, but if he's not somech al shulchan aviv, let's say he's a very enterprising young man, and he's 11 years old, and he has a lemonade stand, and he doesn't need his father's sustenance. Afilu cotton mitziyasa shalom. So it's kind of an interesting thing that Rabbi Hyatt disputes the notion of what we think of as a cotton and a gadol, and adds a footnote to this Gemara and says that a gadol is not chronological; it's whether or not he's sustained by the father, and vice versa for the cotton. All right, that ends that Gemara, and we're still left with the fact that whether he's a gadol or a cotton, depending on which version you agree to, the aniyim were not makbid, because they said, in the future when we're in that same circumstance, we also want our children, whoever it is, to be able to collect leket behind our collection. Right? So now we've ended that Gemara. Now, the Mishnah that we were just learning on Yud Beis Amud Aleph went on to say that Mitzias Abda v'Shifchaso Ivrim Hamahu Shel Atzma. The Mishnah made a chiluk between an Eved and a Shifcha Kanani, where it belongs to the master, and an Eved and an Amma, a male and a female servant who are Jewish, who if they find the Metzia belongs to them. So the Gemara immediately asks the question, Amai lo yer ela poel. Why does this servant, male or female, why are they different than a worker? Right? We had this Gemara a few blot ago, that a worker, under most circumstances, again, a little bit of a nuance there, but under most circumstances, a worker, what he finds belong to the master, right? So why do you say Harihu Shel Atzman belongs to them? It should belong to the master. Okay, Betanya, and we learned in the Brisa explaining this, Metzias Poel La'atzma, that the Brisa says that the Metzia of a Poel La'atzma belongs to the Poel. Zok the Gemara, B'med Var Mamurim, when do we say it belongs to the Poel, to the worker? Zmansha Omalo, Nochesh Imi Hayom, Oda Imi Hayom. You may remember, where the master said to the worker, I want you to do a specific task. I want you to dig a hole for me today. I want you to cut the grass or weed the grass. In other words, your task today is just a sole task of doing just that. Digging, weeding, whatever it is that I'm telling you to do. Aval Omar Lo also imi Malocha Hayom. But if he says, I want you to be my sidekick today and do whatever I ask you, meaning it's wide open, not a specific task. Anything I ask you today between 9 to 5, you're my worker and I'm going to pay you. So in that circumstance, says the Bryce over there, Mitziyos the Balabayas. The Mitziyah is to the Balabayas. So why in our case, where the Eved or the Shifcha find a Mitziyah, that Eved and Shifcha are working for the owner, right? It's his permanent Eved, or at least the Yovel or Shemitah, whatever the case may be. But so why does he have any domain or dominion over anything? Anything he finds should belong to the master, just like a poel, a worker who is not hired for a specific job, but for a generic open work. It should belong to the master. That's the Gemara's kasha. So why are you telling me that the Eved controls whatever he finds? That shouldn't be the case. Zok Rashi, lo ela poel, lo abdo. He shouldn't be his worker. Ela sochir ba'alma, just a hired worker. Right? Tanina de mitziyasa l'balabayis b'zman shelo pirish lo le'eza malacha secharo. V'ovid zeh, ve'eved zeh shekinu rabba l'stam malacha kinu. So in other words, as we just said, that usually, I mean, unless you specify he's hired for any kind of work, why is he different than a hired worker? And a hired worker, whatever he finds belongs to the balabais. That's the Gemara's kasha on what the Mishnah is telling us. What's the circumstance in the Mishnah that allows the Eved, to control? So the Gemara is going to give several different answers to help us understand what the circumstance is. First, Amar Rabbi Tuvia Ba'ava Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Tuvia Ba'ava, the name of Rabbi Yochanan, says, Hacha be'eved nokev margolius askina. She'ein rabba rocha l'shnosa l'malacha acheres. What are we talking about? This Eved has a specialty. And the specialty, he says here, was making holes in pearls. In other words, to string pearls together, a pearl is round, you have to make a hole. And that's a very specialized kind of work because it's easy to crack the pearl. So this Eved taught himself how to do that, or he went to school, whatever. So now he has one function. This Balabayas, this owner is going to be selling pearls. He's got the perfect guy to create these wonderful pearls, and he wants him to do nothing but create pearls. Now, if that's what he's doing, then he has no intention of this Eved doing anything else. What happens if this Eved happens to find something that is very valuable, and he is willing to sidetrack his work? Now, he's not going to steal from the balabos. He's going to pay him back the time that he took away from doing it. Let's say it's for argument's sake, it's $300 an hour to do that kind of work. And he finds an extraordinarily beautiful diamond. And in order to do it, he sees it, he's got to dig it, it takes a half an hour away. So you'll see, Rashi will tell us in a minute, there's a trade-off here. The balabos cannot take that diamond away from him because the balabos never had a havamina to have him do anything but cut pearls. So because he had one chush only, it's like weeding or digging a hole. That's what you hired him for. You hired him to dig pearl, to make holes in pearls. And that's an extraordinarily difficult thing. And for that, he gets paid well. But if he finds a mitzia, that's not in the job description. So it belongs to the Baal, it belongs to the Baal Malacha, to the Eved. But since he took away time from the balabos, from the owner, to do that, he has to repay it. So take a look at Rashi. She'en Rabba Rotza Lishnoso, says Rashi Hilkach lo nicha le'sheyegbiya lo mitzia. The Rabba does not want him to pick up any mitzias. The mitzia ma'ola b'demea nischar bittul malachto lo shchicha. Because in this circumstance, he says it's not likely that what he's going to pick up is going to be worth more than the bittul, than the time that he will take away to do the work. Because it's $300 an hour. Where's he going to find something that's going to be worth more than that? So if he happens to find a diamond that's worth more than that, the balabos never had in mind that he should be owning that. Yisrami, the Eshka, Shalohu, Yishalom l'Rabbo schar bitulo, but he has to pay the schar of his bitulzman, because otherwise you can't steal time from the owner to do your own private work. So if it took him a half an hour, he owes him $150 worth of time, but the mitzia belongs to him, right? So it's clear that in that circumstance, the owner has no ownership over that item. Okay, fine. That's one answer to the question. Rava Omar, Rava says, Rabbi Metzia im malachto askina. Rashi im malachto shelo bitl klum hilkach la'atzmo. For instance, his work was to take a plow. In those days they had these single plows, and just walk along the field and create, let's say, furrows in the ground, so that the next day he could throw seeds in. All right, so he's doing that work. Now he's walking along, and literally as he walks along, he sees a shiny object in the ground. He doesn't even take a second to scoop it up in his hand, and lo and behold, it's a diamond. So so forget about the fact that he's doing a specific type of work. Can the balabos say, wait a minute, you're doing it on my time? Says Rava, he didn't even take his time. He literally did it while he was doing the work for which he's paid. So in that circumstance, says Rava, it belongs to the individual, to the eved, and not to the balabos. So this is another case where he did it in malachto, with his work, without even, so he doesn't even owe the balabos any money for taking away time, because he didn't take away time. He literally walked along, and as he was doing his work, he picked it up, so he didn't even take an extra second.
Wait a minute. Was this found literally in the ground, or was this found on the ground? Because it was found on the ground, somebody dropped it, it's hefker, fine. But if it was found in the ground, he's working on the Baal Bai's ground. Wouldn't it be the possession of it, and what we call mineral rights?
Right. So we're making the assumption here that it's hefker. That, in other words, that it's an item that
right. That I would think more if it was fell on the ground, and he happens to find it while he's digging.
Right. Yeah, and if it was in the ground, he probably wouldn't have seen it. So he saw it on the ground.
No, he might see it because he's digging up.
Because he's digging up.
But I'm saying then logically, at least with the way I think of this,
we have to make assumption that it was a hefker item. Correct. Okay. So it's a hefker item, and therefore the balabos has no kedima, and all of a sudden he walks by and sees it as he's literally doing his work. The balabos has no control over that at all.
Excuse
me.
So now Rabbi, do we really assume that when somebody hires a pearl cutter, that he's not a human being and he has other things might happen? That it's only that and nothing else? I mean, that seems to be too rigid in terms of what you expect when you hire somebody.
Yeah, but during the hours of work, okay, you're right. I mean, he's a human being, but while he's working for the balabos in that, time span, let's say he works 2 hours, gets a break, 2 hours and a break. So he's not working, let's say, literally all day, but so it's a very refined work. He has to be very careful not to crack the pearls. So it's a very focused work. So in that focused work, the owner has nothing in mind that this worker is doing other than cutting pearls. So you can't even argue, wait a minute, no, he whatever he did is mine. No, this guy is so valuable to me that all I want to do is have him cut pearls. So
the thing is, the owner is worried that he doesn't break a pearl. He shouldn't care if he's faster on one pearl than the other pearl, that there's some loose time there, no matter what.
But as long as he's cutting pearls and not digging for diamonds. So the point is that the owner never had a havamina that he would be doing anything other than cutting pearls. That's what the chiddush is. He's thinking this guy's doing nothing but cutting pearls. I don't have to worry because there can be nothing more expensive than what he's doing for me. So if he happens to find something more expensive that the balabos never even would have considered, that belongs. So that's the chap. The chap is that he's doing something that the balabos would never have contemplated would happen during the course of cutting pearls. Therefore, it belongs to the eved.
But the only reason he found it is because he was on the owner's property.
So the teretz is that does not matter here. Doesn't matter. Yeah. Menashe,
so
yeah. So well, no. All right, so maybe I haven't heard this here yet, but you can tell me it has nothing to do with it. But I think of the modern analogy I've heard many times of a piano player his hands are valuable. Sometimes they even insure the piano player's hands, because if he hurts a finger, all of a sudden he can't play the piano. Maybe there's something like that with the pearl. This guy doing this is very fine work. He needs to have very sensitive fingers to feel exactly how it's going and all that. And so you wouldn't use that guy to dig a ditch, because he's likely to hurt himself or whatever in a way that wouldn't hurt digging ditches the next day, but would make it so they couldn't drill holes in pearls. And therefore, maybe it's not just that he wouldn't bother to have him, he wouldn't want him digging ditches.
Right. So, but look at the language of Rashi. Rashi says something interesting. Going back to that Rashi, the Metzia, ma'ola b'domea mischar bitl malachto lo shechicha. It's not likely that he will find a Metzia that is greater in value than the work that he is doing, says Rashi. So in other words, to your point, Menashe, yes, he is such an artisan that what he does is so unique that it doesn't enter the owner's mind, the balabas doesn't enter his mind that there would be anything more valuable than he's doing. So he has no hava amina. It doesn't even enter his mind that anything he may find would even approach the value of what he's doing for him. What we're trying to do here, according to this interpretation, is to say that the owner never would have considered anything he did other than cutting pearls to be part of his work. So it's almost in a sense like digging the ditch or weeding, but the other way around. In other words, his work is so complicated that nothing could or should take away from it. Therefore, when something takes away from it, it can't belong to the owner. It has to belong to the artisan, but he has to pay him for the time that he took, because it is such a specialized work. So I think that's what Rashi is really honing in on, is that the balabas could never have had a havamina to own what this Eved is doing, because he is so solely focused on his specialty that nothing else comes into play. That's how Rashi is interpreting it.
What about the idea of the land acquiring something? I think earlier we had discussions on whether the land could acquire an object or something, and it would depend on whether the owner was watching it, was guarding the land.
Oh, you're talking about a chutzah, right? You're talking about a chutzah. So here, I think the circumstance is difficult. He's sitting at his workbench. And so let's just say that he's allowed a 5-minute stretch every 2 hours. So he gets up and starts stretching himself and walking around in circles to get circulation in his legs. And lo and behold, he sees it doesn't even have to be on the owner's property. He could have taken a stroll just around, and lo and behold, they are lying at the edge of the forest. He sees something, picks it up, and turns out to be a diamond worth thousands and thousands of dollars. So, and of course it's hefker, because otherwise it would have an owner. So the balabas comes and says, wait a minute, okay, you are on my time. Okay, it was certainly during the hours that you would have been working for me. And you're right, it's not on my land where I can claim it's mine. You found it off my land, but it should belong to me. Says this man to Omer, no, it doesn't belong to you, because you never had a hava mina, you never even had a thought that he would be doing anything but cutting the pearls. Therefore, if he found something, yes, he has to pay you for the time. If it was literally on the time that he should have been working for you, that you're 100% right. But for the find itself, you can't take it away from him, because it was never on your radar. It was never in your horizon that he would be doing anything other than that. So in order not to violate the principle of Geselsman, because you're stealing time from the work that the owner is paying you. I mean, he's giving you something. So therefore, you forfeit the amount of money of that time, but you don't forfeit the object, because the object is totally hefker and was never intended, even in the mindset of the balabas. That's
Rabbi.
Rabbi Grauman?
In a different situation where he's digging holes. He's plowing the ground. He's worked very hard for a number of hours. He's entitled to a break. He goes, he wants to sit down and rest a little bit. He walks to the fringe of the property. He sits down, drinks some water, and he happens to find something at that point. Now he has the authorization to sit down and rest for a little bit. That fine, is that to the owner or is that to him?
So if he was hired as a 9-to-5 worker, then 9 to 5 includes all of his time, whether it's break time or not time. Everything that he does for the master. So he gets his break. Why? Because he'll be able to work better. Fine. But if he finds something during that 9 to 5 when he's paid for the 9 to 5, he can't I did it on my break time, because break time is part of your schar. You're a 9 to 5 worker. Now, if he was hired just to dig holes, and that's his only work, then the Gemara says, yes, if you're digging holes, then that's all your work. Then if you find something, even if it was during the time that you were supposed to dig holes, but all that the balabos wants from you is to dig holes. Anything else is yours. Now, again, there's always the question of, did you take away time from the owner and have to pay him for the time? If it's on your break time, the answer is of course not. But if it's not on your break time and you took 15 minutes to do it, you owe him 15 minutes of time. No question about it. But that's a trade-off that the owner is going to has to make, because all he asked him to do was dig holes. And digging holes does not include finding something, at the edge of the field.
So if he found it while he was digging the hole, then he has to share, give it to the owner.
Correct.
If he finds it other than the fact of digging the hole, not related to it, then it's his.
Okay, correct. Yeah, absolutely.
It's like the owner has to decide whether he wants the worker to do a specific job or include other duties as assigned.
Correct.
Perhaps
correct.
even mention.
Therefore, when he says, you're working for me, I need you as a handyman 9 to 5, then he literally 9 to 5, he belongs to the owner, and what he finds during the 9 to 5 belongs to the owner, because we don't distinguish between doing one job or another, because it wasn't job specific. It was being a handyman. The fact that he found something, okay, he found it during work hours. It belongs to the balabos.
Rabbi Grauman,
yeah.
that presumes that he's being paid 9 to 5 though.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Those are paid breaks.
Those are paid breaks. Correct. Absolutely.
So if he doesn't pick it up because he doesn't want to do something wrong, and he finishes the day, the owner didn't make a kinyan specifically on this thing.
If he goes back after the 9 to 5, your question is that it belongs to him, right? If he didn't pick it up during the day, then there's no kinyan, and he comes back after 5 o'clock and it's still there and he picks it up, it's his.
Which would be the same as an unpaid break.
Why isn't it the owner's automatically the minute his work is over?
It is not the owner's. It belongs to the servant, because it was after the hours for which he was paid. Is that your question? And why should it belong to the owner? Just because the worker saw it during 9 to 5?
Why in the owner's field? Doesn't that have any value?
Okay, so I think we wanted to distinguish. The question before was, we're not talking about the circumstance of the chutzner where the chutzner is kone, or we can say it's on the field, but it's an unguarded field. And remember what we said, that in order for a hefker metzia on an unguarded field, there has to be someone, the balabos has to be there. So we're talking about a case where he sent him out to do the work. He was never there, and he's working there. And someone may have been running through the field and dropped a diamond or dropped something, coins or anything else. So and since they're hefker, chutzner is not koner in that case because there was an unguarded field. Now, if there was a fence around the field, that's a different story, right? Or in these particular cases, we can be talking about where it's off the owner's field. It could be at the edge of the field, or not where the chutzner can have any kind of kinyan. So for purposes of this Gemara, we can make up that it's not the field that is being makna here. Okay. So now we gave two answers. Comes Rav Papa, and he's going to give a third answer, but his answer will be sort of flipped a little bit. So the answers, remember the kasha was, why is our Mishnah of Eved not like that Gemara of Poel, of worker? So the two answers said, because first of all, because an Eved who's a specialized gem cutter or pearl cutter is different, or because in the case of Rava, the Eved didn't do anything other than literally scoop it up while he was working, so there is no way that it can belong to the owner. Rav Papa is going to answer differently. Let's take a look. Rav Papa Omar, he's not talking about the Eved here, as did the other two interpretations. He's talking about the case of the Brisa with the Poel. You know what? You can't compare it to the Poel, because that Poel, that worker, was hired to find Metzias. His purpose was, go find lost objects. This reminds me, I'm sure we've all seen this, if you've ever been to the Yam, to the beach, at some point in the latter part of the day, you see these people with these metal detectors walking along the beach because they figure that during the course of the day, people lost all kinds of objects, perhaps valuable, and it's in the sand. It's literally in the sand. So they walk along with these metal detectors, and the detector will pick up the metal, and they will then dig it out and find a watch, a bracelet, a diamond, who knows, right? So I say to my worker, you know what? I want you to go ahead and take this metal detector and walk along this property and collect for me. I'm hiring you. And it doesn't have to be on my property. It can be on public property. Go ahead and collect all of the metzias, the found objects. So you're a metzia collector. Now, if he's a metzia collector, then what's our case? Our case is he found the metzia. So shouldn't it belong to the owner if he's a metzia collector? So the Mishnah, so the Brisa there says, you know why the Poel is collected, why the Poel over there belongs to the owner? Goes to Schar Lalaket Metzias. Frank the Gemara, I guess those days they didn't have these technologically advanced metal finders. So what's the Gemara's example? What's the example of finding a Metzia? So the Gemara says the Afke Agma Bechavre. So it says Rashi, the Afke Agma Bechavre Shetzof Hanor Chutz Ledgosov V'Tzofu Hadagim Sham. Kushiyovu Hamayim Hayotzim Nimtzu Sham Dagim Harbe. There was a sort of a large wave in the swamp, or let's call it a pool or a lake, and the water displaced a large amount of fish that fell onto the shore because of this big wave that pushed the fish out of the shore. So basically, or even be in the ocean. I mean, you have an ocean, and all of a sudden you have a big tidal wave, and the tidal wave spews out all of these fish from the ocean. He then hires this fellow to go and collect the fish, okay, before they rot. He says, collect all these fish for me. That's the Gemara's example of where he is saying, I'm hiring you now for these hours to be a finder, to collect all these metzias, collect these fish for me. So because he's a collector of findings, therefore it belongs to the owner. So what Papa says, that's the case of the Poel, as opposed to an Eved who is doing different things for the Rabbo. It's a different circumstance. So he's distinguishing it by looking at the Gemara's case, that in the case. So in other words, if you hire a Poel to be a finder, then Echanami, anything he finds, not just diamonds, I mean anything he finds, or fish. If he finds anything, he's a finder. That's what he was hired for. So therefore, in that circumstance, it belongs to the Rabbo. But But if he's not hired for that specific task, again, the Gemara is giving you an example of the difference between when the owner can collect and when the worker himself can collect what he finds. Okay, so that's the end of this Gemara. I think we've discussed all the nuances. Now let's go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah then goes on to say that a shivcha, a Jewish maidservant, it belongs to her. So the Gemara is going to ask an interesting kasha. What circumstance arises when this shivcha can actually collect? Let's take a look at what the Gemara says. Hi shivcha hechadami. What are we talking about in the case of the shivcha? So there are 3 stages in a girl's growth. Up to 12 years, she's considered a katana. She's considered a minor child, and the father has full rights. He can sell her, he can marry her, he can do, basically, it's chattel. He controls her because he gives her sustenance and all, so he controls everything about this young daughter of his. At 12 and a day, she becomes a nara. She's a different status. It's called nara. And a nara is not actually full adulthood because it's an interim stage. She is in that stage for 6 months. And at 12 years and 6 months, the Torah calls her a bogras, and a bogras is full adulthood. My nafkamina, because there are different halachas over those 3 periods of time as to what the father can do, what the daughter is allowed to do. There's different halachas. Now, now the physical identity for a girl who is in adulthood is that she has 2 hairs that grow on her body, and those 2 hairs are, if she has 1, it's not sufficient. Shtei saros. So there's 2 hairs identify her, and that usually will occur in puberty. So when puberty occurs, that's the time when it's 12 in a day, 12, maybe it's even before 12. But in other words, that's the physical identifier that she has reached that stage of her life. So for the Gemara Azai, Hi Shivcha, Hechadami. What's the circumstance where the father can control her? Ida Isashtei Saras, if she has shown 2 Saras, my boy Gabe, then what rights does he have with her? In other words, why should it belong to him? She's already, quote, an adult, meaning not a bogris, clearly, but a nara. And a nara has control over herself. The lesle shtei saros, and if she doesn't have 2 hairs, in other words, if those 2 hairs have not yet matured so that she cannot be identified as an adult, right? Then he is alav. Then it should belong to the av. So in other words, so that's the definition. So we're now looking for a definition. So we say if there's 2 saras, then he can't collect from her. And if she doesn't have 2 saras, then he is alav. Then let's look at Rashi. Rashi says, my boy Gabe, Hotanya Yotza b'Simonim. Okay, so if she has the 2 Simonim, the Torah says she goes out with Simonim, it can't belong to the father. The Avua Hava, and if she doesn't have the Simonim, Mitziasa the Hakatanahi. So the kasha is, when can you have the Mishnah circumstance where something can belong to the Shivcha? When can it belong to her? Right? Either it belongs, she's no longer a Shivcha. You don't call her a Shivcha because she's freed. So that's the Gemara's kasha here. she's not a shivcha. If she is teisaros, she's been freed, she's not a shivcha. If she's not teisaros, then it belongs to the father. So how could you ever have a shivcha that can own it? Right? That's the kasha. How can the shivcha own it? She's either not a shivcha or she's a shivcha and it belongs to the father. That's the kasha. So in other words, now let's say she's a katana. The halacha is with a katana, if she works for a master and her father dies while she's a katana working for the master, the halacha is she goes out b'misas ha'av. So she's automatically freed even though she's a katana. So this amplifies the kasha. How can you ever have a circumstance where a shivcha can collect? Either she shows the shtei saros and she's no longer a shivcha, or she is a shivcha and everything belongs to the father, or the father dies and she goes out and she's no longer a shivcha anyway. So the literal case of a shivcha owning a property can never happen. That's the kasha on the Mishnah. How can you ever have a circumstance where a Jewish maidservant who finds something can own it? It either belongs to the master, belongs to her father, or belongs to her and she's not a shivcha because she's already been freed. So that's the kasha of the Gemara here, that this is a circumstance where the Gemara says it can never really happen. Now, the Amar Resh Lakish, how do we know this? How do we know that the Misas Av, it belongs to her? The Amar Resh Lakish, Amar Ha'avriya Kana Atzma b'Misas Av, B'Shus Odin Mikal V'Chomer. We know, says Resh Lakish, that a Jewish maidservant, not a non-Jewish maidservant, this doesn't apply, but a Jewish maidservant, she acquires herself, I mean, she goes out from the status of Shivcha, b'Misas Av, she goes out from the Rishus of the Adon. How? Mikal V'Chomer. And we're going to learn the Kal V'Chomer in a minute. But you understand the kasha. The kasha is we can never have a circumstance where a shivcha can own anything because it either belongs to the father, belongs to the master, or belongs to herself, and she's not a shivcha by definition. So that's the Gemara's kasha. So let's take a look at Rashi. B'Kal V'Chomer, b'Perek Kama de Kedushin. The first parak of Kedushin, we learn the following. Ma simonim she'ein motziim reshus ha'av, motziim reshus ha'adon. If a girl has two simonim, and let's say she's not sold into slavery, she still belongs to the father still has control over her. That's the halacha. But motziim reshus ha'adon. But if he sold her into slavery, into servitude, then she does go out from the master, which stays simonim. Kidi alfinan v'yotza chinam elu yemei bagrus ein kesef elu yemei narus. So we see that there's two circumstances. She goes out either yemei bagrus or ein kesef elu yemei narus, that she can go out from the master's control. Misas ha'av, the death of the father, shemotzir reshus ha'av, which takes her out from the Rishus Ha'av. If she lives by her father and her father dies, she's no longer in the Rishus Ha'av, right? Because he passed away. So if that's the case, and there's no inheritance, in other words, the daughter can't be inherited by a brother or an uncle. We don't allow that. Shemotziim Rishus Ha'av she'einu morish lebonov ma shezachsa l'Torah bebeisa shia masa yadea la'achin. No such thing that if the father dies, she's now in servitude to her brothers. And not your daughters to your sons. So if she's in the rishus of the father, and the father dies, and she's out of the rishus of the father, then kal v'chomer, she's out of the rishus of the master. So this is how the Gemara wants to learn the kal v'chomer. But in any event, regardless, we see that there's never a circumstance where in her servitude she owns something. That's the Gemara's kashir. So how can the Mishnah say that a shivcha, a Jewish maidservant, if she finds something that belongs to her, when can it ever belong to her? It either will belong to her master, belong to her father, or belong to her, and she'll be out of servitude. That's the Gemara's kasha. So the Gemara gives an answer. First by saying Valav Isav Rosh Lakish, that the Kal V'chomer, and we won't get into this, but the Kal V'chomer Rosh Lakish was broken up. It was upgeschlagen. In other words, they said it's not a valid Kal V'chomer. So because of that, we want to say that therefore there is a circumstance where she can be on her own. Let's ask the kasha from our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, in other words, let our Mishnah be a slug up of Rosh Lakish. It's kind of an odd thing, but the Gemara says that our Mishnah itself disproves the Kal V'chomer. But in any event, how can it ever be that the daughter, this Omar, this Jewish maidservant, has a find? And for the Gemara, la'olam the isa la'av. You're right. Whatever belongs to the daughter belongs to the father. Umay harehen shalahen. When the Mishnah says that it belongs to the Amma, to the Shivcha, la'afuke de Rabba. So here the Gemara wants to give us a sort of a back door into understanding the Mishnah. When the Mishnah says that the find belongs to the Shivcha, it doesn't mean it belongs to her. It means it doesn't belong to the master. Why? Because truly everything that the Shivcha owns belongs to the father. It does belong to the father, not to the master. Therefore, it uses the sort of the general term, it belongs to the Shivcha, but it doesn't mean literally it belongs to her. It belongs to her, but her dominion is her father's. So the Gemara is trying to split a hair here and saying, you're right. We didn't mean to say that the find is hers. We meant to say the find is hers to the exclusion of the master, but it's not really hers because the father owns everything she owns. So the bottom line is that a Jewish maidservant who finds something while she's in servitude to a master, and her father is alive, the father is the one who gets that find. It doesn't go to the master. It can't go to the young girl because the young girl has no independent ownership. It has to go to the father. When her father dies, then she leaves the reshus, and therefore it can belong to her. But then she's no longer a shivcha. So it's a little bit of a tricky way of looking at it, but the Gemara wants to tell us that that's a valid approach, and therefore as long as it doesn't belong to the master, we call it belonging to her, but not really her father. Okay, and so Rashi completed there and said, right, okay, so it belongs to her. All right, now, so we have still a couple of more portions of the Mishnah to finish, and the Mishnah goes on to say, Mitzias Ishto. So what did the Mishnah say? That if a married woman has a find, it belongs to the husband because there shouldn't be strife. But if he gave her the get, but didn't yet collect, and she didn't collect the ksuba, it belongs to the wife. Frek the Gemara Gersha Pshita. What does this mean? If he divorced her, he divorced her. What's the circumstance where this becomes even a question? He gave her a divorce. Okay, the divorce is what separates them. The ksuba can happen 6 months later. So why should it even be a question when he gave her the divorce? What's the Gemara's havamina that it should not belong to her? Says the Gemara, b'mugureshes ve'ena mugureshes. That we're talking about mugureshes ve'ena mugureshes. Says Rashi, and now we're experienced now in this whole inyan of a man throwing a get to his wife, because we just talked about it in the last few weeks, except that we said there that if he threw it in the chotzer of his wife, in the Dalan Amis, it belongs to the wife. What happens, Kagon Zorak Logita, and he threw her get in the Rishus Harabim. She's standing on Arcola Avenue in the middle of a Rishus Harabim, and the husband does a drive-by, and he's about to go to her house, and he sees her standing there. He says, I don't have to go to the house. I'm going to throw her the get right where she stands, and she'll be Megureshes. Why? Because it's in her Dalan Amis. Dalan Amis is not only in a private domain, you have Dalan Amis even in a public domain. Says Rashi, Kigon Zorak La Gita, Safik Karav Lo B'Rishus Harabim. His aim wasn't very good, and he flubbed the pitch. And instead of throwing it clearly in her Dalan Amis, he threw it. And now the question is, did it reach her Dalan Amis, or was it still in his Dalan Amis? If it never left his Dalan Amis, she's not divorced. So we have a case of Gureshes ve'enu Gureshes. We don't know if she's divorced. So the kasha here is, in the case of Safik Gureshes, who does this fine belong to? She has now, let's say she found an extraordinarily beautiful, expensive item, and the husband is going to say, wait a minute, you're not divorced. You're still in my domain. Your fines belong to me. So that's the Gemara's kasha. Okay? So it says the Gemara, Begereshes vein Begereshes. To Amar Rab Zera Shmuel, Rab Zera says the name of Shmuel, Kol Makom Sh'Amar Chachamim Begereshes vein Begereshes, that whenever there is a safek Begereshes, Bala Chayiv B'Mizono Seho, the husband is still responsible to sustain her as he is under the wedding conditions. When he marries his wife, he has to sustain her. So if there's a shiloh, whether it's mugareshes or not, he still has to sustain her. So then now it raises the question: if he has to sustain her, then l'chayra, she has to reciprocate and give him the metzia as to not to create conflict in the marriage. Conflict in the marriage. That was the only point of the metzia, is that there shouldn't be conflict. He's sustaining her. She has to give back by not having sort of an independent ownership of something she finds. So l'chayra, that's the whole kasha here. In that circumstance where it's a safek get and he has to give her mazonos, is there ibo? Is there the principle of friction? Says the Gemara, the only reason why the Gemara says so there shouldn't be friction. Here there's more than enough iba on both sides. He's about to divorce her. The only thing he did wrong is he didn't clearly throw the get in her Dalan Amis. He's divorcing her. There is no comedy. There is no good feeling, good relations between this husband and wife. Now, I mean it on the halachic sense. They could still be friends. But because he's divorcing her, we don't say that she has to reciprocate and give him anything she finds because of iba, because of this friction, between husband and wife. Even though he's commanded to sustain her, she's no longer required to give him her fine because of Eva. It's kind of an uneven balance, but the Gemara justifies it by saying, since he's giving her the get, and he initiated the get, the fact that he didn't throw it, that's on him, it's not on her. So he made the error here. So now we're going to have to investigate whether he has to throw the get again, or what has to happen. In the meantime, she finds a fine. He has to sustain her, but she doesn't have to give him the fine. That's how the Gemara comes out. So it says the Gemara here, because he has to sustain her, the Gemara has to tell us the Mitziyasa Shalah. The Tama Mai Amar Rabbana Mitziyasa Isha. In other words, it's a chiddush here that if the wife is Megureshes, then it belongs to her, because you would think that it follows logically that if the get is a safek and he has to sustain her, she has to give back and give him the fine. So So the Gemara is telling us a chiddush. No, in the case of a suffix get, he still has to sustain her until he gives her the valid get again. But in the meantime, if she finds a find, she does not have to give it to him, because the concept of iba, of bad relations, of friction between them, no longer holds because he's divorcing her. So it's an interesting theory. Here's a circumstance where the Torah says the husband has to give to the wife, but the wife does not have to give back to the husband in that circumstance. Okay, so now we have finished this sugya. And Mitzvah next week, we're going to pick up on a whole different approach that the Mishnah is now talking about, Metzias of a star, where the finder can't keep it, it has no value to him, but he has to return it to one of the two parties of the star. So it's a different twist. In other words, a star was lost, and the finder says, wait a minute, there's Reuven and the Shimon, I've got to give it back to one of them. I can derive no benefit because this star has nothing to do with me. Who do I give it to? And you'll see how complicated we have the circumstance of the Mishnah and the Gemara is going to tell us about who the finder has to give it to and in what circumstance he has to give it back. So Mitzvah next week, we'll pick up from there. And everyone have a great week. Make sure you vote. And let's all be safe this week, because we don't know the outcome. We don't know what's going to happen after the election. So Mitzvah Hashem, all will be well. And we'll pick it up next
Say in Chicago, vote early, vote often.
Yeah, right.
Right.
And the dead vote too.
But use a different name.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Cool.
Thank you, Tuvia.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Rabbi
Have a
Grauman.
good week. Have a good week.
Shavua tov.
Sure.
Rabbi Grauman,
Yes.
quick question.
Yes.
When you used, I was just curious, you were talking about the term of a young woman, Nara.
Nara.
Is that also the root word for the Yiddish word narish?
Well, narish is like when you're childish. Zainish, zainish, narish.
Right. So
But it's always used more as foolish.
right. So narish
Juvenile.
is kind of foolish, but so if it is extrapolated from that, it may well be because the Nara is not a katana and not a gadola. She's a hybrid that has a different halacha. So maybe someone took license and used the word Nara and said narish because it's I don't know. I mean,
Zainish kanar, bisti
Nar
narish. I mean,
is
you're
the
talking
masculine
about.
form of
you
nar.
know,
so if you're a nar, you're still in that interim stage where you're not a gadol and not a cotton.
I don't think the gender has any.
No.
I think it just
No.
Well,
means juvenile.
It's juvenile. Yeah, of juvenile, right. I mean, they could well have said Zanish Kuten. Don't be a cotton. Don't be a thing. How they got the word nar, you have to look at the
According to Wiktionary, but it doesn't list sources. It really comes from the German side of Yiddish.
You have to.
Similar to sophomore.
A sophomore, right? So maybe there's some. Shalom Aleichem always wrote about the richness of the Yiddish language, that you can take one concept and probably come up with 25 different names of words for the one concept. That's how rich and beautiful the Yiddish language is. So maybe someone, in trying to interpret what a fool is, somehow came up with the word anar. He's an ar because of this a child, nar or nara, being not yet a gadol. He's kind of, like you say, a juvenile. Like, what is he? Probably worth checking up for those who are.
Well, it's like the girls, if they get a certain age, they know they would like to bake a cake, but when they tell them to fold in an egg, they're not sure what that means.
Not sure what it means. Right. All right. We'll take it under advisement, Chaim.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
day. Bye-bye.